The watchfire collapsed at midnight. I stood on my compound's veranda as flames consumed the trading quarter, painting the Harmattan sky in shades of crimson and ash. Below, my people scattered like frightened guinea fowl, their cries rising through the smoke. My warriors had already barred the compound gates at my command. No chaos would breach these walls. I remained unmoved, my ceremonial cloth untouched by soot or fear. From the crowd below, a whisper reached my ears, carried by wind that should not have carried it so clearly. He was warned. I gripped the carved wooden railing. Warned. I was Oba Adebayo of Ilara, chosen by lineage and blessed by ancestors. I did not heed warnings. Gave them. Yet as I watched the settlement burn, something cold settled in my chest. This incident was no accident. Somewhere beneath layers of pride and certainty, I knew the truth. This disaster had not simply happened. I had invited it. The realization should have frightened me. Instead, I turned from the flames and walked inside, already composing words that would shift blame elsewhere. 6 months earlier, Ilara had known what I called peace. The kingdom functioned like a well-oiled grinding stone under my rule. Every tribute collected on time, every law obeyed without question, every dissenting voice silenced before it could spread. I raised levies to fund a bronze monument in the village square, a statue of my father rendered in metal and pride. When farmers protested they could barely afford yam seeds for planting season, I increased their tribute to teach them gratitude. My council of elders nodded approval. My warriors enforced compliance. I walked through my compound believing myself just even merciful. I had not ordered anyone flogged in years. The widow Amara came to my judgment tree one morning, begging relief from debt her dead husband had incurred. I listened from my carved stool, then denied her petition. Mercy, I explained, could not override custom. She wept. I dismissed her. Later that day, I ordered palm wine with my goat meat and barely remembered her name by evening. The potter, Alyamide, lost his kills in the dry season. I needed cowries for the monument's dedication ceremony, so I authorized seizures of property from those behind on tribute. Alyamide had paid most of what he owed, but not all. My collectors took his kills anyway, the great clay structures his grandfather had built. I never met Alyamide. I only reviewed the record noting his assets now belonged to the royal household. I approved without reading his petition for extension. There were hundreds of such petitions. I could not waste time on each small tragedy. A mother named Folake watched her 16-year-old son, her only child, conscripted into my warrior guard. She had begged for exemption, explaining he was all she had after fever took her husband and daughters. I needed warriors for the northern boundary, where raiders occasionally tested our defenses. I conscripted her son anyway. She stood before me, trembling, asking if I understood a mother's heart. I did not answer. I had her led from the judgment tree. An elder called Babatunde came to my compound gate one cold Harmattan morning. He had once advised my father but had fallen into poverty after backing the wrong faction during succession disputes. Now he begged kola nuts for sustenance. My warriors mocked him, calling him a fool who had lost everything through poor judgment. I watched from a window above, saying nothing. When Babatunde raised his voice, declaring that kingship required compassion as well as strength, I had him taken to the village square. For 3 days he sat in public view, bound, while people passed. Some passed quietly, ashamed. Others with enthusiasm, proving their loyalty. I felt nothing watching this. I told myself I was maintaining order. Pride, I believed, was not a flaw but a requirement. An Oba who showed doubt invited rebellion. An Oba who admitted error revealed weakness. So I admitted nothing, doubted nothing, and ruled with a certainty that felt like righteousness. My father's voice echoed in my memory. A king's word is law. To question it is to question the ancestors. My people could not leave even if they wanted to. Dense forests surrounded Alara on 3 sides, its paths known only to warriors and hunters. The northern trade route, our only connection to other kingdoms, was controlled by checkpoints manned by soldiers loyal to me. Anyone wishing to travel needed permission I personally granted. I granted few. Debt bound most families to land they no longer truly owned. I had revised inheritance customs so that unpaid tribute transferred property to the royal household while allowing families to remain as tenants. They worked land that had been theirs for generations, now paying for the privilege. Children learned early to whisper rather than speak openly. Teachers reported students who questioned royal decrees. Parents warned sons and daughters that certain thoughts, even unspoken, could be dangerous. Hope became a private thing, hidden like sacred objects. Fear was routine, expected, normal as the rising sun. Everyone learned the same lesson through experience. Endure or disappear. And most chose endurance. The compound walls grew higher each year. He arrived on an evening in late dry season when the air hung thick with dust. I remember because I was dining on the veranda, annoyed by the heat. A servant mentioned that a stranger had entered the settlement at dusk, passing through the northern checkpoint without proper identification. My captain of warriors, a man named Kalechi, had let him through because something about the stranger's manner had unsettled him. Unsettled how? I asked, not particularly interested. Kalechi struggled to explain. The stranger had worn simple cloth, carried no weapon, asked for nothing. Yet Kalechi felt he should not be stopped. I laughed. You let a wanderer frighten you into breaking protocol? Kalechi's jaw tightened but he said nothing. I dismissed the matter. The stranger was just another beggar seeking opportunity in the settlement. He would learn quickly that Alara offered nothing to those without status. I returned to my meal, the peppered bush meat with pounded yam, and thought no more about it. That was my first mistake, though I would not understand that for weeks. The stranger stayed near the village well in the lower market. Traders mentioned seeing him there, sitting on the stone rim, watching but not speaking. He never begged, never sold anything, simply watched. A week after his arrival, he approached one of my warriors during evening rounds. The warrior, a young man named Chidi, later reported the encounter to his commander. The stranger had spoken softly, almost apologetically. Tell your Oba, he had said, that the stone leopard must be moved before the rains come. The old water path needs to flow. Chidi had laughed. What leopard? What path? The stranger gestured toward the monument square, where my father's statue stood. Beside it, an ancient stone leopard, part of the settlement's original architecture, had been incorporated into the monument's base. The stranger said nothing more, only smiled, a sad sort of smile, and walked away. Chidi told the story in the warriors' quarters as a joke. It reached me through Kalechi, who reported it with obvious discomfort. I felt my anger rise like floodwater. I summoned the stranger to my judgment tree the following week. This required some effort, as he had no fixed dwelling and no one knew his name. Eventually my warriors found him at the well and brought him before me. The gathering was full that morning. Nobles, traders, petitioners, all watching as the stranger stood before my carved stool in his dusty cloth, calm and unremarkable. You sent me a warning, I said, making my voice carry to the compound walls. About a leopard and flooding. He nodded once. I did, my Oba. Explain yourself. He spoke simply. Beneath the monument, an ancient water channel was built by the first kings of Alara. It diverts rain from the upper settlement to the river. The stone leopard marks its entrance. Your monument buried it. When the rains come, the water will have nowhere to go. I felt heat rise in my face. This stranger, this nobody, lecturing me about my own settlement. You think I'm ignorant of my own kingdom's design? I think, he said gently, That mistakes happen to all men, even kings. The gathered people fell silent. No one spoke to me like that. No one suggested I had made a mistake, certainly not publicly. I rose from my stool, descended, and stood before him. He was shorter than me, older, with gray threading his close-cropped hair. His eyes held no challenge, no defiance. Only certainty. That certainty infuriated me more than insult would have. "You come into my kingdom," I said slowly, "uninvited, unwelcome, and declare that I've endangered my own people through foolishness?" "Not foolishness," he replied. "Pride." The word hung between us like smoke. I struck him. My fist caught his cheek and he stumbled but did not fall. Blood welled at the corner of his mouth. I struck him again, and this time he fell to the red earth. My warriors moved forward, unsure whether to intervene. "Flog him," I commanded. "Teach him what happens to those who insult their Oba." They hesitated only a moment. Then duty overtook doubt, and they obeyed. I watched his blood darken the earth beneath the judgment tree. The stranger made no sound as the blows landed. When they stopped, he lay crumpled on the ground, breathing shallow. I stood over him, my knuckles aching. "Only fools fear signs," I announced to the gathered crowd. "Only cowards believe in omens from wanderers. This man is neither prophet nor diviner. He is a liar seeking attention." The people remained silent. I gestured for the warriors to remove him. As they dragged him toward the compound gates, he lifted his head slightly. His eyes met mine. Not with hatred, not with pain, with pity. That look haunted me for days. I told myself it meant nothing. Common people often looked at power with incomprehensible expressions. Envy, resentment, confusion. But pity. What right did he have to pity me? I increased patrols throughout the settlement. I ordered my council to investigate the stranger's background, find out who had sent him, what conspiracy he represented. They found nothing. He had simply appeared like morning mist. That troubled me more than any answer would have. The harmattan winds blew hot and dry, and I dreamed of floods. The Council of Elders convened 3 days later. These were men who had served my father, who held ceremonial positions and collected generous portions for their loyalty. They emerged from their meeting with a proclamation I had not requested but welcomed nonetheless. The stranger was declared a fraud. His warning was dismissed as the delusion of a disturbed mind. The Oba's judgment was declared flawless. The people must remain loyal. Warriors tightened control at the checkpoints. My informants reported whispers in the markets, questions about the stone leopard, speculation about channels beneath the settlement. I responded with detentions. Not many, just enough to remind everyone that curiosity had consequences. A trader who had asked too many questions about water systems was fined. A historian who researched the settlement's original design lost his position. Oppression does not always arrive with warriors and weapons. Sometimes it comes through procedure, through small penalties that accumulate, through the slow constriction of acceptable thought. The settlement grew quieter. People stopped asking questions. And I told myself this meant I had won. My father would have been proud. The rains arrived with unusual intensity. The first downpour fell harder than anyone remembered, turning pathways to rivers within hours. I stood at my window watching water pour from dark clouds, flooding the lower markets. My advisors assured me this was normal. Heavy rains came every few years. The settlement had weathered worse. But as days passed and the rain continued, I began to notice something wrong. Water accumulated in the monument square, pooling around my father's statue and the stone leopard. It should have drained away. Instead it rose, inch by inch, flooding nearby compounds. I sent builders to investigate. They returned confused, reporting that the drainage channels appeared blocked. Debris, they suggested. Or perhaps damage from construction. Nothing serious. Nothing that couldn't be repaired once the rain stopped. Except the rain did not stop. It fell for 7 days straight, And on the 8th morning, as I stood on my veranda watching the swollen square, something shifted. The ancestors were speaking, but I had forgotten how to listen. The stone leopard cracked with a sound like thunder. I watched the ancient carving split along invisible fault lines, the pieces separating and collapsing into the water below. Suddenly, the pooled water began draining away, but not down through channels as it should. Instead, it spread outward, flooding into the lower settlement with terrifying speed. Compounds disappeared beneath brown water. People screamed, climbing to roofs, clutching children. My reception hall, on the ground level of the royal compound, began flooding within minutes. Water seeped under doors, rose across clay floors, soaking ceremonial cloths and ruining generations of gathered wealth. I stood watching, unable to move, unable to think. This was impossible. My builders had assured me. The elders had declared the stranger a fraud. Had been right. I was always right. Yet water does not care about righteousness. It flows where it will, indifferent to pride or position. As I watched my kingdom drown, a movement caught my eye. In the upper quarter, the only part still dry, a figure stood watching. Even from this distance, I recognized him. The stranger stood where water could not reach him, on a hill that should have flooded hours ago. He raised one hand, and though I could not hear him speak, I saw his lips move. The flood stopped. Not gradually, instantly. Water that had been surging through pathways simply halted, as if hitting an invisible wall. Then it began flowing backward, redirecting away from the settlement center, channeling toward the river through paths that had not existed moments before. I watched this impossibility occur, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes witnessed clearly. The stranger lowered his hand. The rain stopped. Clouds parted, revealing pale afternoon sun. Water drained from the reception hall, leaving behind mud and wreckage but no bodies. Somehow, impossibly, no one had died. I descended from the veranda and walked through the flooded compound, my sandals squelching through filth. My warriors followed at a distance, uncertain. When I reached the compound gates, I ordered them opened. I walked through my drowning settlement toward the hill where the stranger waited, and with each step, I felt my certainty crumble like sun-dried clay. He did not move as I approached. People emerged from compounds, from rooftops, staring at the receding water and the dry stranger who stood impossibly untouched. When I reached him, I found no words. What do you say to someone who has proven you catastrophically wrong? He spoke first, his voice gentle. The leopard was placed there 400 years ago by Oba Ogunlade the Wise. He understood that hills make water dangerous. The channels he built saved this settlement through generations. When you buried them beneath your monument, you buried his wisdom. I tried to speak. My throat felt tight. You knew. I warned you. Why didn't you? I stopped. He had warned me. I had flogged him for it. Who are you? Asked finally. He smiled sadly. Someone who has watched many Obas. Some listen. Some learn. Some. He gestured at the flooded settlement. Some pay the cost of their pride in suffering that belongs to others. That truth hit me harder than any physical blow. My people had paid for my mistake. Not me. The council elders, he continued, declared me a fraud because acknowledging my warning meant acknowledging your error. They protected their positions, not their people. Your warriors obeyed brutal orders because disobedience seemed more dangerous than cruelty. This is how kingdoms rot from within. Not through evil intentions, but through systems that reward loyalty over truth. I sank to my knees in the mud. The stranger had power I could not comprehend. He could have destroyed me, destroyed the settlement, destroyed everything. Instead, he had saved it. Saved people I had oppressed, ignored, dismissed as replaceable. I believed, I whispered, that strength meant never admitting weakness. That mercy was for those who could not maintain order. My father taught me this. And now, I looked at the flooded pathways, the frightened faces, the settlement I had nearly destroyed through arrogance. Now I understand nothing. That, he said, touching my shoulder briefly, is the beginning of wisdom. Your father was wrong. Not because he was evil, but because he too had learned from his father. The chain must break somewhere. What happens now? That depends, he said, on whether you've truly learned. I called assembly the next morning under the judgment tree. Everyone came. Nobles, traders, farmers, warriors, servants. The ground was still damp, still smelling of mud and failure. I stood before them without my crown, without my ceremonial cloth, just a man who had been catastrophically wrong. I ignored a warning, I began, my voice shaking, because I could not accept that someone might understand what I did not. I punished the messenger because his truth threatened my pride. I buried evidence of ancient wisdom beneath a monument to my family's greatness. And you paid the price. Silence greeted my words. I continued, forcing myself to meet their eyes. I learned cruelty young. My father taught me that mercy was weakness, that doubt was failure, that leadership meant never admitting error. I believed him. I was wrong. I told them everything. About the seized kills, the conscripted sons, the mocked elders, the families crushed beneath tribute meant to fund vanity. I cannot undo what I've done, but I can change what I do next. Starting now. An old woman in the crowd began to weep. Not from joy, from release. Changes came slowly. I released families from debts incurred through my excessive tribute demands. I returned Olyamide's kills, restored with royal household funds. I sent Folek's son home. I found Babatunde and offered him position as advisor, which he refused, but he accepted my apology and my provision for his remaining years. I reduced tribute to sustainable levels. I ordered the monument dismantled, using its bronze to create farming tools for those who had lost everything. I established councils where people could voice concerns without fear. Not everyone forgave me. Many couldn't. Amara turned away when she saw me in the market. Olyamide accepted his kills back but never smiled in my presence. I did not ask for their forgiveness. Some wounds cut too deep, inflicted too deliberately. Instead I worked, listened. I learned names of people I had ignored. I memorized faces of those I had harmed. Late nights found me with the settlement's oral historians, learning about Oba Ogunlade and the systems he had built to protect his people. Systems I had destroyed through ignorance I called confidence. Wisdom, I learned, is often buried beneath monuments to our own importance. Months passed. The settlement rebuilt. Trust grew tentatively like new shoots after bushfire. People began speaking openly again. Children laughed in pathways that had known only fear. One morning, I walked to the hill where the stranger had stood during the flood. I went alone, something my warriors hated but allowed. I stood where he had stood, looking down at the recovering settlement, and whispered thanks to empty air. I did not expect response. You came. His voice made me turn. He stood behind me unchanged, as if months had been merely moments. I wanted to thank you, I said, for saving them. For not destroying me when you could have. I saved them. You're saving yourself. Those are different things. He smiled slightly. Will you stay? Yes. Will you guide me? You don't need guidance, he replied. You need humility which cannot be taught, only learned through consequence. You've learned. Whether you remember is now your choice. He turned to leave. Wait, I called. What's your name? He paused, looked back. Does it matter? Then he was gone, not walking away but simply absent, like harmattan mist at dawn. That was 17 years ago. I'm old now, my hair gray, my back bent from decades carrying the weight I nearly let crush others. Ilara prospers. The drainage channels were rebuilt, expanded, improved. We never forget them now. Every new Oba must study their design before coronation, must walk their length, must understand that ancient wisdom exists for reason. In the monument square, where my father's statue once stood, there's now a simple stone carving. It shows an Oba kneeling before a stranger, learning the lesson every leader should know. That listening is the first duty of power, that warnings exist to save, and that pride ignored becomes suffering shared. Children ask their grandparents about the Great Flood, about the Oba who learned too late, about the stranger who stopped the water. The stories vary across compound fires. Some make me villain, some make me hero. Both are true. I was a man who mistook cruelty for strength, who nearly destroyed his kingdom through arrogance, and who learned, barely painfully at terrible cost, that real power lies not in being right, but in being willing to be wrong. That is why the warning is still told, passed from elder to child, a reminder that even kings must listen.